Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's BGA interview. We're grateful to CTN Studios for hosting us this evening, and we're delighted to welcome our guest, His Excellency Miguel Berger, who has been Ambassador of Germany to the Court of St. James since July last year. In that relatively short period, the Ambassador has already brought British-German relations significantly forward. He was instrumental in setting up the UK-German Strategic Dialogue in January, which revived the UK-German Cultural Commission and announced the establishment of a new branch of UK-German Connect in Bonn. This interview comes at a particularly interesting time, just a few days after the ratification of the Windsor Framework and just ahead of His Majesty's state visit to Germany on Wednesday. We'll be covering both those topics in the course of the interview, and I would welcome any questions you have that I can put to the Ambassador. So please do send in your questions at any time during the interview by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. As importantly to many of you, the Ambassador is also a very engaged and supportive patron of the British-German Association. So I'll be starting the interview this evening with a few questions over his life and career. Ambassador, welcome to the interview this evening.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you.
May I start with a personal question? You are the German ambassador, but you have a Spanish name and you were born in Madrid. May I ask for an explanation of how that came about?
Yeah, that might be unusual for some people. The background is that my parents studied both in France, where they met, and then later they moved to Spain. So my father worked at Siemens, close to Madrid. And during my whole childhood, we were moving back and forth between Spain and Germany.
And I understand you studied economics and then joined the Auswärtiges Amt in 1988. What was it about the career of a diplomat that made you take that step?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it had to do maybe also with my childhood, that I lived abroad as German in Spain. I was always interested in foreign policy, and I decided very early on during the university, my time in university, to prepare specifically for the very difficult exam of the Federal Foreign Office. So economics, I also studied international law, and I prepared myself for this exam.
And during the course of your career, you've had a number of overseas postings in Romania, in Mexico, in the Palestinian territories, and for a number of years at the UN in New York. Which of your overseas postings has most influenced or changed your outlook on the world?
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing if you work in a foreign office is that you change every 3-4 years. New language, new situation, new culture. And I always found that very fascinating and interesting. And during my career, I specialized, I would say, in 3 areas. Number 1 is United Nations. I was twice posted in New York. The second area is economics. I was Director General for Economic Affairs. I was Climate and Energy Envoy of Germany. And the third one for me was to focus on the Middle East. I was Middle East Director, which was a fascinating job. But, you know, in the end, it's very difficult to say what was the most inspiring. The first post is maybe the one which has the strongest impact. 1990, Romania, after the execution of the dictator Ceausescu. That was a fascinating start for me as a diplomat, but obviously to have the honor to serve as a state secretary in Germany was something very, very special. So it's the highest serving public servant in the ministry.
A bit like the permanent undersecretary of the Foreign Office.
Like the permanent undersecretary, right.
And you've had, if I understand right, a couple of other times in your career at the center of the Auswärtiges Amt in Berlin, in the directorate looking after Parliament and the cabinet. In those roles, either as Staatssekretär or in the cabinet and parliamentary directorate, was much of your time taken up with UK-related issues, or was the UK a relatively new area for you when you were posted to London?
No, UK was not new for me because obviously in all foreign policy questions, security policy questions, the United Kingdom is and has been one of our closest partners. But I did not study in the UK. I had not lived before in the United Kingdom. But obviously I had been for many, many visits here, mainly in London.
And as Staatssekretär, you would have presumably had the choice of any embassy in the world to come to. And you said earlier when we were talking that the Middle East had been a particular focus for you. So what was it that made you decide to accept the offer to become ambassador to the UK?
Yeah, obviously United Kingdom is a fascinating country. London is one of the main capitals in Europe. So and I found it also very challenging to say now after Brexit, how can we reconstruct this relationship? So the whole setup seemed very interesting and fascinating for me.
And you've now been here around 9 months or so. What has most surprised you about the UK or British people that you weren't aware of before you became ambassador?
Yeah, that's interesting because in the end, I've only been here for some months, as you very rightly said, but I can already now sense a shift in the attitude towards Europe, the European Union. So when I started here, there was still, I could feel in Parliament and in other meetings, there was among some people a certain distance. But the Windsor framework, which you mentioned at the beginning, it has changed a lot. So, and we can discuss that with more detail. But my feeling is that after this Windsor framework, we are now in a different situation in the relationship between Europe, Germany, and the United Kingdom.
I'll come on to the Windsor framework in a bit more detail in a moment. But looking at your time in London overall, I assume you would have a number of years as ambassador. Certainly we would hope that you would stay here a number of years. Is there a particular goal you set yourself for what you wish to achieve as ambassador?
Yeah, I mean, Brexit is a decision. We take Brexit as it is. But my objective, our objective, is to have the United Kingdom as a close and reliable partner, as close as possible to Germany and to the European Union. I would say this is the overriding objective, and this is the basis under which we work.
Let's come on now to the state visit by King Charles and Queen Camilla later this week. I understand that you will be greeting their Majesties at the airport. And if you look back to the reign of the King's predecessor, Queen Elizabeth made a number of state visits to Germany. What do you think this particular state visit can hope to achieve?
Yeah, so I must say we are really very, very happy to see that the King is going to Germany, the first visit of the King. And it's also interesting if you think that the last state visit Her Majesty the Queen made was also to Germany in 2015. And it comes at a moment where we have the Windsor framework, we have a new relationship with the European Union. And I must say the way we have interpreted this decision by the King, but also by the British government to say the first visit and even before the coronation will be to the European Union, and it's beyond Germany, I would say, the importance, I think is a signal, is a gesture. And this is something that we very highly value and welcome.
And I understand the King will be the first head of state to be welcomed at the Brandenburg Gate. Can you say something about the significance of that?
Absolutely. And normally, this military ceremony for reception is done at Schloss Bellevue, Bellevue Castle, where the official seat of the German federal president. But in this case, absolutely, as you say, it's the first time that it's done at Brandenburg Gate. So I would say it's a very special distinction also to underline how important this visit of the king is for us.
If you look back again over the reign of the Queen, each of the state visits and even some of the non-state visits, for example, by the then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, were really extraordinarily enthusiastically received by the German people.
Yeah.
What is it, you think, that accounts for this fascination in Germany with the British monarchy and the British royal family?
Yeah, I would say that it has to do, I think, with a very specific role the Queen also played after the war. With her she made 5 state visits to Germany, overall 7 visits. And I think the most important one was maybe the first she made. If I recall it correctly, it was 1963 or 65, 11 days traveling through Germany. And it was really a very important gesture by the monarchy and by Her Majesty the Queen. So it has to do also with the German family origin, the connections which exist between the royal family and Germany. And I think it is the respect that many people in Germany also felt for the service of the Queen, 70 years of duty and service to her country, to the Commonwealth. So she was really very, very highly regarded in Germany.
Just a quick reminder to our audience that if you would like me to ask any questions to the ambassador, please send them to us through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Let me now turn to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework. And first of all, just looking back a little bit historically at the Northern Ireland Protocol itself, this was clearly a big issue in the relationship between the UK and the EU, but there was particular criticism from a number of leading German politicians and diplomats about the behaviour of the British government in relation to the protocol. Why was this such a big issue in Germany?
It was a big issue because the Northern Ireland Protocol not only is about preserving the Good Friday Agreement, maintaining an open border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, but it also has a very important function in preserving the safety of the internal market, because we do something that you will not find any other example around the world, that a territory like Northern Ireland is part of the internal market of the European Union, and that requires some safeguards. And we were very surprised that the then Prime Minister and the then Foreign Secretary Liz Truss brought a bill to Parliament, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which totally contradicted what was negotiated, ratified by the British government. And our expectation would have been, if there are obstacles, if there are difficulties, there are articles within the agreement to open it up and to negotiate, but not to bring a bill which would have totally undermined the existing legal arrangements. And so what is new now, I think, is that between the President of the European Commission, Ms. von der Leyen, and the Prime Minister, there is now, after this negotiation, a relationship of trust. Yeah. And we will have now a process of implementing the Windsor Framework. And this requires a trustworthy and a trustful cooperation. And I think we are convinced that we have now this basis for cooperation.
And what, in overall terms, do you see the possibilities that this new trust and the signature of the Windsor Framework opens up for either the UK-EU relationship or the bilateral relationship between the UK and Germany in particular?
Yeah, For us, as German government, the relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom is also a very important element. So no country in the European Union would move forward as long as the relationship with the European Union overall was not working the way it should be. So our expectation is now, and we are waiting for a decision of the British government, would be to say, let's now move forward on research and development. And the United Kingdom has, as we know, fantastic universities, an extremely high level of research and development, and Horizon Europe is the program for doing that. There are other programs like Copernicus and others. So my expectation would be, if there is a willingness by the government to negotiate that in a very short time frame and to strengthen again this relationship on research and development.
We have a number of academics and teachers in the audience today, so I'd just like to pick up on this question of Horizon that you just mentioned. So interestingly, Rishi Sunak has not responded as enthusiastically as one might have expected to the offer of rejoining Horizon, and has said that he would need to look very closely at the costs and benefits of it. What arguments do you think could convince the Prime Minister or the British government that rejoining Horizon would be value for money for the UK?
Yeah, whenever I go to a meeting with a British university, everybody's enthusiastic about Horizon and about also the very specific research and development cooperation between these British and the German universities. I think you cannot value Horizon, only on the numbers in an accountant way, because the importance of this research and development translates later into startups, into industry opportunities. So I think the value for Europe as a whole is enormous. And so we would hope that the British government takes the decision to rejoin. What we would not like to see, to let me also underline that, is now to enter into any kind of negotiation on how much does it cost and where can we save some money. I think the program is there and our openness is there, and I really hope UK will rejoin soon.
Aside from Horizon, there is also the possibility of bilateral relationships between universities, and the BGA has actually been involved in helping to support some of those. I understand that you are particularly enthusiastic about some programs that the Welsh universities have set up to enable European students to study at a lower cost in Wales. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Wales, the Welsh government has developed a program which is called Tithe, which helps students in both directions. And Peter, one of the, I think, most regrettable decisions that was taken after Brexit was to leave the student program Erasmus. And that means that European students, German students who want to come to a British university have to pay overseas fees. And with the current cost of living crisis, and then fees between 20, 30,000 or more pounds a year, what we have seen only in the first year is a reduction of more than 55%, because it's simply many people cannot pay that. And what we would like to see really is the United Kingdom rejoining Erasmus or setting up a similar program which opens British universities to European students. And in general, I would say one of the most regrettable outcomes is on mobility and on people-to-people contact. And so the British-German Association is doing a lot in that area, but we also need some government decisions if we want to strengthen that field.
Of course. And on the Erasmus question, I think there was, unfortunately, some ideological questions about Erasmus in the immediate aftermath of Brexit. but there was also a perception, particularly I think in the Conservative Party, that the Erasmus arrangements were asymmetric in the sense that there were many more EU students wanting to come to the UK than vice versa. And so the UK ended up paying a larger share of the bill compared to the benefits it got. Do you see there being a possibility of an Erasmus arrangement which would in some way even out these perceived inequalities or asymmetries?
Yeah, the asymmetry exists, no doubt about it. And so for I would say every British student going to Germany, we have 10 Germans wanting to come to the United Kingdom. But also here, it's the same as with Horizon. I would really caution against looking only at these numbers. Because, you know, it's fascinating for me to see, Peter, wherever I go in the United Kingdom, I find Germans working, living and working here in this country, contributing to the British economy, contributing to cultural exchange in many, many fields. And the majority of them came through programs like Erasmus. So if you look at the contribution somebody is making to a country, if you want to value that in money, you have to look much more than the fees for the universities. So I would say this kind of exchange programs, this is something where everybody wins out of it. So we should see it as something positive for the people, and where governments should try to do the best to help especially young people to have this kind of experience.
One of the barriers to British school children and students studying in Germany is the language question. And I'd like now to bring in a question from a member of the audience, Sean Bish, who says, you mentioned the importance of improving UK relations with Germany and the EU more widely. And I wonder how the teaching of languages, and especially German, can play a part in this.
It plays a very important part. And we see with a lot of concern the decline of language learning, but especially German language learning in the United Kingdom. If you look at the last 15 years, the numbers have dropped 85%. So only to give an example, A-level last year, only 3.5% in German. So very low numbers, and whoever here in the audience has a good idea what we can do to strengthen language learning is very much welcome. And you know, my experience is a language opens the understanding for the culture of a different country. So I can really only encourage language learning in general.
There's a related question from the audience about the connection between language learning and German businesses. So the specific question is, how will German businesses react to the scarcity of German speakers in Wales and the lack of cultural awareness regarding Germany? So do you think this, the problems of fewer people learning German also has a business impact?
It can have a business impact, and but I've seen that many universities offer specific language courses, business German. And I know that the Goethe Institute is also offering language courses, but you know, we have more than 2,500 companies, German companies in the United Kingdom. So I hope that learning German for business reasons is an incentive. But other, you know, young people, when they think about Germany, they think about Berlin and maybe the nightlife in Berlin, which is more attractive than business German. So there might be very different reasons why someone wants to learn German.
I mentioned in my introduction the establishment of a new branch of UK-German connection in Bonn and to promote school exchanges. And we've got a question from Peter Brock, who is the head of the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft in Düsseldorf, asking whether the embassy would be able to help find more UK teachers or schools wanting to come to Germany and in particular to North Rhine-Westphalia, and also exchanges for work placement students. I wondered to what extent this new initiative would help in youth exchanges of various kinds.
Yeah, so it's let me really say that we see this as a very important step. So the British and the German government together finance these offices, and their task will be to strengthen youth and school exchanges. And I hope that they will be able to identify schools. I know that you in the British-German Association are doing the same. The Goethe Institute, the German Exchange Service, DAAD is doing it. So I hope that we can enhance the number of schools who are interested in exchange programs.
I know from our previous conversations that you attach a lot of importance to town twinning, and that's also something that the British-German Association is keen to promote. We've got a question from Richard Jaggard just to ask you to say what the value you see that comes from twinning and what success could look like for the further development of twinning relationships between the two countries.
Yeah, twinnings are extremely important, and we have more than 480 town twinnings, and some of them have a very long history. So in my first weeks here as ambassador, I was in Oxford for 75 years of Oxford-Bonn twinning. Later, I was in Bristol for Bristol-Hanover twinning, also 75 years. And we are organizing in June a conference financed also by the Auswärtiges Amt, by the Federal Foreign Office, where we want to look with mayors in what a modern town twinning, what that can be. Because there are many topics which are important for city councils, for mayors, for civil society, where I think that cities and municipalities can play an important role. And there are thousands of friendships, of relationships, which had their origin in these town twinnings. So for us, they are a key element of British-German relations.
That last question was from Paul Bristow, who is one of the BGA's regional representatives and does a lot of work promoting voluntary town twinning associations. Do you see a role in town twinning for the voluntary sector as well as links between council to council?
Yes, because without the voluntaries, we are not able to organize town twinnings. Town twinnings depend on the willingness of some persons really to engage personally, to organize these things. And I must say we are extremely grateful to all those in these more than 408 town twinnings who dedicate their time to organize events and exchanges. It's fantastic, and this is really what we need at all levels.
And another related question from Andrew Bastard is the funding for civic functions, particularly on the UK side, is either severely reduced or non-existent. How can town twinning at a council-to-council level work when financial constraints are so severe for British councils in this area?
That's a problem, and my experience is that for the combined authorities it's easier because in general they have staff dedicated to international relations. So my hope would be that in the end we can help to overcome these obstacles by, for example, the work you are doing in the British-German Association, by helping these municipalities in organizing events and also helping them with best practice. Because, but it's not the only obstacle. I think other obstacles due to Brexit are visa restrictions and in general the paperwork which is involved in these kind of exchange programs. So I hope that over the coming years and in discussions with the British government we can reduce these obstacles, especially to youth and school exchanges.
Another initiative that was announced in the UK-German strategic dialogue was the revival of the UK-German Cultural Commission. And I understand that the Minister of State in the Foreign Office is meeting his opposite number in Berlin in a couple of weeks' time to kick off this new revival. What do you hope can come from this new revival of the UK-German Cultural Commission?
Yeah, we are very happy to see that now in April, mid-April, we are going to have this first meeting in Berlin. And, after Brexit, we went into the political archive of the ministry and we found a cultural agreement from 1958, which is outdated, but it's a legal basis for these negotiations and these talks. And we will have all the cultural institutions present. The British Council, the Goethe Institute, the German Exchange Service, DAAD, and others. And we want to see how we can reduce obstacles. And if you look at the outcome of the British-French summit, it also mentioned the question, for example, of school exchanges and youth exchanges. So it's not an issue only for Germany. I think we all would like to strengthen these kind of exchanges. And so many of these areas or questions include the Home Office, because mobility is an issue for the Home Office. So it goes beyond the Federal Foreign Office, it goes beyond the FCDO, and we want all the stakeholders present and hopefully making some progress for our cultural relations.
I'd like to move on now to a number of other topics which may create potential for closer relations between the two countries. So the Windsor framework is part of the withdrawal agreement, but there was a separate trade and cooperation agreement which was signed to look at trade issues. And I know there has been a concern from both sides about impediments to trade that have arisen post-Brexit. To what extent do you see a scope for better UK-EU or UK-German trade within the scope of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or is that something that is impossible while Britain remains outside the single market and the customs union?
I think there are areas which can and need to be discussed, and we are going to have end of 2025. So then with the next British government, whoever that is going to be, we are going to have enough time to prepare this first revision of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. But obviously there are limits to what is possible, because the United Kingdom, we like it or not, is a third country to the European Union. And that means that there are certain restrictions and requirements, and it would only be possible to change that if the general setup would be changed. And but if we take Brexit as it is now, then there are some things we can do, but there are very clearly limitations.
One question from Peter Wilson-Smith in the audience is whether you could envisage a kind of Norway-style agreement between the UK and the EU. So Norway is also outside the EU, but it's part of the European Free Trade Area. And does that present a possible model?
It was one of the options the European Union had put on the table when the Brexit negotiations started. But then the decision was by the then Prime Minister to say that there was no interest in a Norway model or a Swiss model. I would say there are always possibilities to discuss a way forward, but let's maybe focus now on the revision of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. But definitely there is an openness on the German side to discuss whatever model the British government would like to discuss in detail.
On a related economic question, as you know, there are significant strikes that have been happening in both countries, and today there is a very widespread strike in Germany. We have a question from David Field as to whether you think the concept of a Warnstreik would be helpful in the UK.
Yeah, so today's strike in Germany, which is railway plus airports, my personal feeling is this is already more than a Warnstreik, a warning strike. I think the concept in itself makes sense. But, I think we also have to see how difficult this cost of living crisis has been for many, many people. And for the governments, I think, and for the employers, the challenge is how to find a solution which on the one side tackles the cost of living challenges for people, but on the other side is not a driver for renewed inflation. So that makes, I think, the specific negotiations this year very, very challenging.
In addition to the renewed trust between the politicians in both Germany and the UK, there is also a perceived issue that media reporting is not entirely objective or fair about both countries. And I had a question from Richard Tyler about the UK popular press allegedly publishing negative stories about Germany, and how you would respond to this when you feel that Germany is being unfairly represented.
Yeah, in general, I would say I cannot really complain, because what I find interesting is that for many, many media in the United Kingdom, if there is a comparison which is made on very different levels, from the National Health Service to the economy to inflation, the comparison is in general with Germany. And I think this is in itself positive. And if you look at German reporting about the United Kingdom, I must say I'm really amazed to see how many media correspondents we have here in London, in the UK. So sometimes I have the feeling that there is at least as much reporting about the United Kingdom than about France in the German media. So in general, I must say I'm satisfied.
Great. Let me now move on to another possible area for cooperation, and that is defence. So since the Russian invasion of Ukraine last year, there has been much greater cooperation between NATO allies, much greater coordination. In the medium term, do you see this as opening potential for Britain to be more closely involved with Germany in defence matters, or is the medium to long-term aim of Germany to make defence more of an EU competence, given the potential difficulties about relying on NATO partners in the long term?
Yeah, I would say it has to do a lot with mainly NATO. So if there are also some, I would say, positive conclusions we can take out of this terrible Russian war of aggression, is that the G7 stood up to the challenge, NATO stood up to the challenge. And whatever we have discussed before about Northern Ireland and difficulties, on Ukraine from day one, there was an excellent cooperation, sometimes really on a daily basis, between the US, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, on how to react, how to coordinate the support. And so this cooperation has been absolutely remarkable. And I think, yes, we would like to have more British engagement when it comes to defense cooperation. And there is one project of European EU defense, which is called military mobility, which, as we know, for NATO is very important, and for the European Union, how to bring, for example, American troops and material as fast as possible through EU territory. And the United Kingdom is going to participate in that. So the clear answer to your question is yes, we want more defense cooperation, and we think we need that.
I'd like at this point to bring in another question of the audience, which is from Elizabeth Steeman. And she asks, in general, how will a change in the government change the relationship between Germany and the UK and openness towards Europe. So we need to have an election by January 2025. Most people assume it will be next autumn. Is there any risk to some of these initiatives in, for example, the defence area of a change of government, or could that potentially open new opportunities?
I would see no risk at all, because if you look at the main topics like Ukraine, Iran, many of the foreign policy challenges, I think that Labour as the opposition sees things in a very similar way. And what is important for me as ambassador, and as you know, we are politically neutral on these topics. It is very good to see that we can make such a good use of the political foundations. They organize party-to-party contact. So the Konrad Adenauer Foundation between the Conservatives and the Christian Democrats in Germany, Friedrich Ebert, Labour and the Social Democrats, Naumann with the Lib Dems and the German liberals. And the exchange is there on all levels. So it's not only between the government and the German government, but overall between political parties at very different levels. And I would say this is very, very positive. And that is something that we as embassy also want to see moving forward.
That's great. Another impact of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine has been on energy security, because Germany traditionally relied significantly on Russian gas exports. Last July, there was a financial agreement between the UK and Germany on the Neu-Connect project, yes, this new 1.4 gigawatt interconnector that will be opening up in the next few years. Is there further scope that you see for cooperation between UK and Germany on energy security issues?
There is a lot, I would say, of political focus, because energy security, given the war in Ukraine, is of key importance to all governments in Europe. And we should not forget that we were able this winter to overcome all the difficulties and obstacles because we had a mild winter and we could manage to have the gas storage full. The next winter will be an enormous challenge. So if we want to enhance energy security, we need to cooperate between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And the British potential on offshore wind, on hydrogen is enormous. And I would really like to see more cooperation. And you mentioned this investment on an electricity interconnector. But we would also like to see, why not, a feasibility study on a hydrogen pipeline between the United Kingdom and Germany. We have a number of delegations, business delegations, coming to the United Kingdom, going to Scotland to see the potential. So this, for me as an ambassador for the work of our embassy, energy cooperation is really on the forefront, I would say, of the projects we are trying to move forward.
Clearly, there is a very different energy mix between the UK and Germany. So Germany has decided against nuclear power, and Britain has a significantly greater potential for offshore wind power. There has been some concern raised that one of the side effects of the understandable focus on energy security has been a downgrading of climate change objectives. And there was a wobble last week in the German issue with the European Parliament, European Commission over this. Can you reassure people that Germany remains committed to its climate change goals?
No, Germany remains absolutely committed, and we want to achieve net zero already in 2045. And there might be some misunderstanding about this decision, because the possibility to maintain a combustion engine for some cars would only be under the assumption that the e-fuel which is used is CO2 neutral. So I think the whole idea behind that concept is to be technology open. And if we look, for example, at trucks or buses, there is still a discussion. Is hydrogen the better technology, or is battery the better technology? So it's also, I think, very important not to take too early a decision on the technology and let it develop and see what the better opportunity is. But you mentioned before the strategic dialogue, and one of the agreements was to cooperate on climate change, to cooperate on the COP processes. And we all remember the very successful COP26 in Glasgow. And I must say the cooperation on climate policy has been really outstanding with Alok Sharma and our German climate envoy, Jennifer Morgan. So we have a lot of exchange. And, if we look at the financing of this transformation process, the City of London can and will play a key role in sustainable finance. So this is another dimension where I see a potential in British, German, European cooperation.
We talked about defence issues a little while ago, but I've had another question from Mark Wood, a member of the audience, about this, which is whether Germany is now fully committed to increasing supplies of weapons to Ukraine. As you know, in the early phases of the war, there was some question mark about the speed of Germany's response. But is that something which is now past history in terms of Germany's commitment to the Ukrainian side in the war?
Yeah, very early on, this war started last year on the 24th of February. 3 days later, Chancellor Scholz gave, I would say, historic speech in the German parliament, where he talked about Zeitenwende, the watershed moment, which meant really to change our Russia policy, to get out of Russian energy, and also to support Ukraine as long as it's needed. So the German policy there is very clear. If we look at military support, I would say that behind the US, United Kingdom and Germany are the second most supportive countries. If we look at the overall support, I think it's very important to underline that we have 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Germany. And King Charles is going to visit a refugee center in the outskirts of Berlin. We have the budget support. So if you take everything together, I would say Germany is by far the largest supporter of Ukraine.
Just picking up the point on refugees and broadening it to the migration question, one is already hearing in German media some concerns from municipalities and the Länder about their ability to look after such a large number of refugees at the same time. And as you know, there is an issue in the UK about the number of migrants, some of them refugees, some not, who are crossing from the EU into the UK across the English Channel. If we look ahead, it's likely that over the next decade or so, there will be significantly larger numbers of migrants as a result of climate change, making traditional population centres uninhabitable. Do you think that the framework, so Germany's constitutional commitment to allowing all refugees, regardless of number, and Britain's approach to trying to limit the number of people crossing the Channel is sustainable in an age of potentially hundreds of millions of people wanting to move from one country to another?
Very difficult question. As you very rightly say, there is a discussion now, and Chancellor Scholz has invited to a summit with all federal states, because we don't have only the 1 million refugees from Ukraine. We have the continued arrival of Afghans, Syrians, Iranians, Iraqis. Some of them, as you say, are migrants who come for economic reasons, others because of political persecution. In Germany, it's a constitutional right that everybody has the possibility to claim asylum. And I don't think that this is going to change. But what we need, and we are working on that now for more than 8 years, is to have a better coordination within the European Union. Our request to our British colleagues is to look beyond the channel. Because if you compare the numbers arriving over the channel are relatively small compared to the number the whole European Union is facing. But we will not be able to tackle that as long as we don't develop a way of cooperating with the countries of origin. So it's about development cooperation. You mentioned climate change. It's about also opening legal routes for people to come to work and then go back into their countries of origin. It also has to do with the possibility of sending those who are not entitled to get asylum back to their countries of origin. So it's a very complex problem and challenge. And in Germany, it is very high on the political agenda, as in the UK.
Yeah. In Germany's post-war history, EU membership has been almost central to Germany's identity, and Germany has always taken a very strong leadership role within the European Union. Recently, there's been an initiative by President Macron to set up the European political community to involve a number of countries like the UK who are not member states but are nonetheless part of the wider European family. Is that something that Germany would in principle be supportive of, or does that go against Germany's ambition to widen and deepen the institutional frameworks of the European Union?
No, we are supportive of the European political community, and I think it was a very positive step by the then Prime Minister Liz Truss, the decision to participate in the first meeting in Prague. And the signal which was sent, having there 44 countries of the wider European region, because it also includes countries in Central Asia, and to send the signal, we stand united against Russia's war of aggression. That was very important. But I would really totally separate that, Peter, from the question of the European Union, the enlargement, and, for example, the question about the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. This is politically on a totally different path.
We have time for a couple of last questions. So,
Sure.
The first one is from Oliver War, a member of the audience, who asked about whether you think in the future UK e-passport holders, electronic passport holders, would be able to use the European e-passport gates, or whether that is something that is impossible while we remain outside the EU.
No, it is possible. And I know that the Home Office is talking to the German Federal Ministry of the Interior. And I am using every time I come back to the United Kingdom, I use this possibility with the e-passports, and I hope it can be in both directions.
A question about your own personal preferences, which is, could the ambassador talk about German literature, and in particular, which works, novels, poetry, or drama have particularly moved you? It'd be interesting to hear your views on that.
Yeah, very difficult to focus that on one or two authors. I love literature. I try to read a lot, but I must say, in my current function as ambassador, it is very challenging to find the time. But I try really to read literature, and I like a program which is set up by the Goethe Institute to translate German literature into English, so to make German literature better known to the broader public. But I also read, I must say, a lot of British authors also when I was younger. I think one of the first I read was Graham Greene when I was 14, 15 years old. And I have, so I enjoy very much reading literature.
You've been, just one last question from me. You've been very generous during the interview in your references to the British-German Association. Looking at civil society institutions as a whole, what contribution do you think that the British-German Association or other organizations like us can make to the bilateral relationship or to mutual understanding?
I think that the British-German Association, but also in Germany, the different Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaften, they play a fundamental role. They play a fundamental role because of, you know, what you are organizing on schools, on partnerships. We talked about twinnings. We talked about youth and school exchange, everything that has to do with the people-to-people contact. And that requires the work of volunteers, the engagement of people who are interested in the other country, in the culture, in the exchange. This cannot be done by governments. That cannot be done only by embassies. So I would say British-German Association and all those engaged in the hundreds of twinnings and partnerships play a fundamental role in our relationship. And we are very, very grateful to all those who engage and you know, use their personal time in order to work for British-German relations. That is really fantastic for me also as an ambassador to see that.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening and for being so open in answering a wide range of questions from our audience. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. BGA members can already book for our next event on the 5th of April, when Jenny Hill, the BBC's correspondent in Berlin, will be talking to Katja Hoyer about her next book. If you'd enjoyed this evening's programme and if you would like to support the BGA's work, we receive no public money, so we rely on your donations to continue to do what we do, and you can make a donation very easily by clicking on the Support Us tab at the top of our website. Many thanks again for joining us this evening, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of this sunny spring evening. Thank you.